around about a third to half of the population believe in psychic ability.
Ordinary people have extraordinary experiences.
Psychical research is an investigation into the limits of human personality, into the limits of what a human being is.
We're trying to combat the kind of general science fiction view, such as the X-Files, that there is kind of the truth is out there, these weird and wonderful things happen.
Right now, I'd say there's about a 90 to 95% likelihood that we can really interact with the world around us through some new means of communication, something truly new.
The Society for Psychical Research itself was set up in 1882 by a group of Cambridge scholars who were very interested to find out whether science could in some way demonstrate that there was an ability in the human mind that could show telepathic abilities, clairvoyant abilities and so on. But they're also very interested in the question of survival. Whether there was, if you like, a ghost in the machine, whether there was something that went on when the machine was dead.
If you look at the list of presidents who were sort of the figureheads of the society, one gets William James. William James was perhaps the greatest psychologist at the turn of that century. Sir William Crookes, great physicist. Sir Oliver Lodge, great physicist. Sir William Barrett, all FRSs. These were all presidents of the society.
The pioneers were really sticking their necks out. On the one hand, the scientists had established the rules for heat, light, sound, electricity, magnetism, and gravity, and they thought they knew what could happen and what could not happen in nature. And on the other hand, there were people, thousands of people, who said they'd seen tables levitate to the ceiling, and people float around rooms, and people who don't seem to have ever heard of the law of gravitation, and that you could speak with the dead. And of course this was utterly ridiculous. It didn't fit with the 19th century idea of what the universe was about. And so this group of people felt that it was really a scandal and a disgrace that science had not yet addressed these problems.
Their method of work was to go out and look for cases. They worked a lot with mediums under fairly tightly controlled conditions, so that fraud in many cases would have been very difficult. But from 1930 onwards, this work tended to come into the laboratory, where you could control conditions even more. And Professor Ryan at Duke University in the United States, in fact, established the experimental methodology in the subject. And it's fair to say that the conditions that are used in parapsychological research are often very much tighter than in other areas of science. We have our journals and our proceedings going back over the whole century and involving literally thousands of reported cases where the evidence is quite strong that something anomalous is going on.
Paranormal investigations are still carried out in the field and in the laboratory by parapsychologists who apply strict scientific protocols to these cases. For the last 2 years at this farmhouse in North Wales, the residents have been experiencing unexplained religious writing and carvings appearing and disappearing on the walls. In order to try to understand what's going on in their home, they have called in Dr. Mike Daniels, a senior lecturer in parapsychology from John Moores University, Liverpool.
One of the first things I looked at was this fireplace, where there are lots of phenomena, I suppose, as you could best call them. Essentially stains on the stonework and carvings in the stonework. When I came in a couple of months ago to do a survey of the phenomena, I put post-it stickers on the wall to indicate where things were, and this is the typical icon almost of the monk shape which appears in various places. And there's some stains here. There's a stain of a monk shape there and a stain of a cross there, and a stain of a cross there, and stains here. There's down here is a large stain of a monk, which shows up well. When I surveyed the whole house, I think the current count is over 200 of these phenomena, 200 stains and carvings and other phenomena. So there's a lot going on here.
Sometimes the phenomena seem to follow things that we've said.
Things that we've suggested.
Yes,
indeed.
so that I can remember looking at the stains on the wall and explaining my theory of how they were produced to someone, and saying that, well, if it was actual carvings, then I'd begin to believe something. And indeed the carvings appeared. And before the mini-monk there begun to disappear, I could remember having said, and again I can't remember exactly to whom and when, well, carvings that appear I can believe in. Carvings that actually disappear would be really difficult to do. And lo and behold, the carvings have started to disappear.
Within a week or two of making that suggestion?
Yes.
Yes, which
right.
begs some questions, doesn't it?
It does rather.
Yes.
The religious writing and carvings are not just confined to the house. Some have appeared in the garden.
So you can see you've got this monk-like shape. It's like a cutout in the tree, and it's growing some sort of fungus or something on it. And that's been there since, I think it's last year we first noticed that, in the year 2000, probably about June time. Can't quite remember, but as you can see, it's sort of part of the tree, and goodness knows where that came from. David was not very thrilled because he doesn't like trees being vandalised in that sort of way at all.
One of the things that I've decided to set up is a video surveillance camera, which is essentially a time-lapse camera, which can record during the day and also record at night, has some night vision. Focusing upon this particular wall here, which has been one of the walls where there's been quite a lot of activity going on, and things change on this wall, carvings appear, stains appear and disappear, in the hope that if we can set this camera going for a period of time, if something does appear on the wall while the recording's being made, then we'll be able to see whether anyone's been here chiseling away or painting on the wall. And if something appears and we've got a continuous record which is showing that nobody has been here doing these things, then that would be quite strong evidence that something very strange is happening.
My first degree was in chemistry, which is a fairly hard science. And I'm perfectly prepared to believe in something for which I've got some real evidence. And I'm not the kind of person which will let my feelings run away and say, I'm perfectly prepared to say, oh, this is great fun, let's invite people in for a party and enjoy the phenomena. But on the other hand, I'm not prepared to let that at the moment upset my fairly hard scientific view of the world. And I want some evidence as to how these have been formed. Well, on a practical level, I could do it. Rosemary could do it. It's difficult to see how our three daughters, one of whom lives in Chester with her husband and the other two who live at a much greater distance, could actually do this. A family conspiracy is perfectly possible, of which I could be the target for all I know. The only thing I know for certain is that I'm not. But of course, you don't know for certain that I'm not. And quite reasonably, you shouldn't be persuaded. It's something, I think, that needs to be investigated very carefully, because as Mike said earlier, it's either a genuine phenomenon, in which case it really is an interesting phenomenon, or it is a very elaborate hoax.
Even if this is a hoax, then the psychology of hoaxing is very interesting in terms of why do people hoax? What's the motivation? What are they hoping to get out of it? What leads people to create an extremely elaborate hoax over a very long period of time, as this could very well be. Yeah. So from the scientific point of view, from the psychologist's point of view, the psychologist is interested in the human motivation and how that relates to hoaxing. But if we can eliminate the hoax hypothesis, which is conceivable, we may be able to do that, then that leaves us with a mystery. Yes, it leaves us with something that is very difficult to explain in scientific terms.
To further his investigation, Dr. Daniels will take the video surveillance footage back to his laboratory for more detailed analysis. Meanwhile, the mystery of the writing on the wall remains unsolved. Here at the Psychology Department in Hertfordshire University, Dr. Richard Wiseman has dedicated the last few years of his research into investigating spontaneous cases using high-tech thermal imaging equipment.
We're finding that it's a certain type of person that has these experiences. People that tend to believe in ghosts, that have a whole range of unusual experiences in their past. We're also finding the experiences are stacking up in certain locations. So you lead people one at a time through the venue, ask them to mark down on a floor plan where they feel something strange, and lo and behold, they're all placing the X on roughly the same place, which is rather curious. We're also finding out that some of these allegedly haunted places have rather strange thermal patterns, due to underground currents or strange ventilation systems and so on, which explains some of the experiences. And also some experiences do seem to be linked to high variance in geomagnetic activity. So where there's a large degree of change in geomagnetic activity, that's where people are saying, yes, I'm experiencing something here. So it may be that we're able to piece together a scientific explanation for something which looks to be, on the face of it, paranormal.
One of Dr. Wiseman's recent case studies has been at the Haunted Gallery at London's Hampton Court Palace.
So this is the output from a thermal imager, and basically it's giving us a thermal map of the area that the imager is pointing towards. And in this case, it's part of the Haunted Gallery at Hampton Court Palace. The main part of the image there, though, is telling us the thermal map of that, how hot and cold each area is. We left it running for quite a few nights, the idea being that if a ghost appeared, it might appear as a sort of a shape of cold moving across the gallery, because lots of people do feel extreme cold when they think they sense the presence of a ghost. Unfortunately, we didn't catch a ghost on there, but it did allow us to track down some of the very unusual thermal patterns that are happening in that location. One of the problems we face is that people want to believe in paranormal phenomena. They want to believe the X-Files are true. They want to believe they're psychic and in contact with other people. They want to believe in ghosts. And as scientists, we have to sort of put that aside and say, well, we all have wants and desires, and that's perfectly reasonable. But here we're looking at the evidence. We're trying to collect and analyze the evidence in such a way that we come to a little bit more of an objective rather than subjective decision about it. So I'm sure the results will disappoint some people, but, we're about the scientific side of things, not really just catering to public belief.
We're trying to combat the kind of general science fiction view, such as the X-Files, that there is kind of the truth is out there, these weird and wonderful things happen. But often when you do look at some of the kind of cases, they don't hold up very strongly. Often you have to look at them within much more controlled setting, and often it's some of the experimental research, such as Ganzfeld research and other research on ESP done in a control setting in a laboratory, which seems to be showing some of the more interesting findings in that they're trying to rule out some of the other more conventional explanations.
British universities are now respected worldwide for their research into parapsychology. One of the most established units is here at Edinburgh University, where Professor Robert Morris and his team can test under very strictly controlled environments for extrasensory perception. His 25-year study has now come up with some groundbreaking results.
We're doing really two kinds of work here. Some of it is on what's not psychic but looks like it, trying to understand the psychology of deception, how people form beliefs and maintain them even in the absence of solid evidence, and so on. We also are trying to take a look at some of the best evidence that there really are some additional ways of interacting with the world around us. One line of reasoning has been that, in fact, our brains are too busy paying attention to external stimuli to notice everything that's going on inside. So one line of research has been driven by the idea of so-called noise reduction. Reduce the noise coming in from the rest of the stimulation that we get, and maybe then we can start to pay attention more to very weak impressions generated internally that we ordinarily don't notice. And so one kind of technique is the so-called Ganzfeld technique.
The Ganzfeld is one of the sort of most standardized ESP testing protocols. The Ganzfeld itself comes from the German meaning whole field, and it's essentially a very mild form of sensory deprivation. So you have the red light shining on plastic hemispheres, the halved ping pong balls, which just give you a nice flat field for your vision. You have white noise playing in your ears, which again sort of shuts down your ears. You can't hear any patterns in it, so your brain starts to ignore it. And you're sitting in a comfy chair in a relaxed state, so you tend to ignore your body to some extent. The idea is that this cuts down external distractions and might make you look more towards internal imagery, internal functions that might relate to psychic functioning. Once the receiver, the person who's trying to be psychic, is in this Ganzfeld state, we then have a second person, the sender, who's trying to send some kind of information to that person. The sender's in a remote room roughly 25 metres up the corridor, and what they're doing is watching a video clip that's about a minute long over and over again. Their task is to try and convey that information somehow through psi down to the receiver in the room here. Now that video clip has been selected by this computer here. It's completely random. I don't know what it is, the receiver doesn't know what it is, the sender's the only person who knows. There's 100 possible clips stored in the computer, which could be selected for any given experiment. The video clips have all been chosen to be stimulating in some way. They're either emotionally stimulating or just visually very attractive. It's something that should maintain the sender's interest, something that if the receiver picked up imagery, they'd get quite excited, quite into the pictures they see. Well, I'm afraid the session wasn't a hit. Chiara didn't manage to pick up on what you were trying to send. Now, that's not a problem because we can't expect every individual trial to be a success. What we actually do is we take your results and we add them together with everyone else's and see whether overall we're getting the effect coming out.
My grandmother and my mother have always reported what they kind of came to be psychic experiences, and so I thought it would be interesting to come here and see how this is studied from a scientific point of view.
This kind of experiment can't prove that ESP exists. All it basically does is, over a large number of people, shows that they tend to be guessing more often than you'd expect by chance. The way it's set up, by chance you'd expect them to be right 1 in 4 times, because they have to choose 1 out of 4 video clips. Overall, over all the laboratories around the world, including Edinburgh, this typical success rate's about 33%. It's very slightly more than chance, but it is statistically significant. On some of the subpopulations using like creative people, it's been between 50 and 80% in one case, which seems to again correlate to the idea that creative people do better. But it still doesn't prove ESP, it just proves there's an anomaly there that we call ESP that we have to now explain.
Well, when I first started here 15 years ago, I was about in the mid-80s, about 85% persuaded that there really is something new going on here beyond what we presently understand. During the last few years, I'd now place it in the mid to high 90s. I think it's extremely likely that the work that we are doing here and in various other places scattered really throughout the whole world now is tuning in on something that is quite new, that we need to know about. I'm very encouraged by the recent results here in our own research unit. We now feel we are going on to another step in our work, looking at much more the kinds of details of what happens, the mechanisms that may be involved, and I think we're going to be able to provide society with some extremely valuable new pieces of information about ourselves.
Dr. Peter Fenwick is one of Britain's leading neuropsychiatrists. He has been studying paranormal activity from a medical viewpoint for the past 25 years.
How the brain works with parapsychological communication is not known. What we do know is we know a lot about the way the brain functions, and so because of that one can make some suggestions as to how it might work when it's communicating in a parapsychological way. If we look at the work on meditation, there is 1 or 2 papers in the literature which show that if somebody meditates here, somebody over here is affected by this meditation. Now, what are the structures which are involved? Well, if we look at the brain, this, if you see the brain here, you can see that these are slices cut through the brain, and so we're cutting down from the top of the brain through the cortex, which is the cellular mantle of the brain, right down deep into the areas which mediate emotion, and then right through down to the brain stem. Now, the area which in the meditation research seems to be important is the thalamus, which is in this area here, and round the thalamus, there as well. Round the thalamus there is this nucleus, which is the reticular nucleus of the thalamus, and this is a sort of enveloping cellular structure which stops information coming into the nervous system and also controls what goes out of the nervous system. Now in meditation this becomes very active. It sort of isolates the mantle of the brain, the cortex of the brain. And it looks as if in those circumstances one facilitates this communication between people. And so probably the basic nuclei in the center of the brain itself, as well as the actual cortex or the mantle of the brain, are both important. The question why mainstream science rejects parapsychology is an interesting one. Part of it is historical, and part of it is because of the assumptions of mainstream science. If you believe that consciousness is created in the brain, then any other means of communication must be wrong. It's as simple as that. But if you accept that the brain may in some way be non-local, that means it may be interconnected with other brains, then parapsychology becomes possible. Now, neuroscience tells us that any form of communication like this is impossible, and that's why many scientists reject it. And I'm afraid that many scientists have actually not looked at the evidence of parapsychology, because if they do, they will see that there is huge amounts of evidence, both anecdotal and proper randomized controlled trials, which show that communication is possible. So we're going to have to change the way we think.
Psychical research is one of the most important research subjects in the calendar of science. It looks very much as if it now, in this present 21st century, is beginning to come into its own as a serious subject which is recognized to be serious.
Parapsychology is coming up to the cutting edge of one of the branches of science. It shows that the world is highly interconnected. We are talking now about brain function, which is biology. One is talking about communication over large distances, which is physics. We're talking about molecular biology. We're talking about social biology, and all of this is coming together in a very strong way. So it's an enormously exciting time, and science is right at the center of this. And I'm sure in the next few years it'll be showing that the relationship of man to the galaxy, man to man, and consciousness to the galaxy is going to be very different from how we see it now.